Hey, man. We haven't done this in person.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, but we've only ever done them over remote interviews, haven't we? So,
Yeah, I think so.
right, we've got loads to talk about because I'm the statist, you're the libertarian,
That's right.
and there's things we don't agree on and there's things we do agree on.
Right.
And
there's things you need to be crucified for.
things I need to be
Joking.
crucified for. And there's, no, you're right. And then there's things that you need to wake up to the real world for.
All right, yeah.
All right. So, but we're definitely in a period of you being I told you so, rightly so, in certain things. So I think there's a lot to talk about. I think a good starting point is you've been on my show 3 or 4 times and we've talked about libertarianism, but obviously all of our shows have grown a lot over the last year. Lots of new people coming in. So I think we need to retouch some of those subjects because people wouldn't have heard this before.
Sure.
And then we need to talk about Australia.
Yeah, for
We
sure.
need to talk about generally what's going on with reactions to COVID, the impact on money, you escaping, your new job. There's shitloads to talk through.
Yeah, lots of things.
So let's just start with libertarianism. Just for anyone who's listening, they're like, well, what is this libertarianism stuff? I've not heard about it because I hadn't heard about it until I discovered Bitcoin. Just explain to them what a libertarian is, what it means to you.
Yeah, of course. So in my view, a libertarian is someone who is concerned with the rights of the individual and also essentially what is the right way society politically should be structured and what are our rights versus the state's rights. And so in my view, I essentially deny the existence of political authority. So I'm saying we should not treat the state like it is a special category. We should treat it like you or me, just like an individual would. And so, as an example, if it would be wrong for me to sort of go around pointing my gun at people and saying, hey, pay up my pay me some money so that I can go run public services, that would be wrong for you or me to do. So it should also be wrong for the government to do that. So I see it more like it's almost like the golden rule. We're applying the same consistent rule to every person, regardless of whether I have a special badge that says I'm a policeman or I'm a judge or I'm a tax collector or I'm whatever. So I guess at a high level, that's essentially how I would explain it to somebody. And so the classical formulation that we normally talk about in libertarianism is the NAP, the non-aggression principle. So the idea is you should never initiate aggression against somebody else. That violence in self-defense is permissible, but you do not go and aggress, right? So I do not steal your stuff, you don't steal my stuff, I don't harm your body, or I don't harm your property. That's kind of the general idea. But then if we'll go one step deeper there, is if we also explain this idea that it's that different isms, it's not that they don't have a theory of property rights, it's that they have a different theory of property rights to what libertarians believe. So libertarians, in my view, believe in what's called homesteading. And so the idea is that property should only be transferred if you were the first to it, or to mix your labor with it, or through an agreement, right? A contract, or I sell you my land, or I buy land from you, or you pass it on, right? Like father passes on to the son, or something like that. And so we view it like other forms of government that don't respect those rules essentially are giving themselves a special right to something that they shouldn't have. And I guess summarizing that, essentially, in my view, a libertarian is somebody who believes in more of a private property society. So the idea is, all the services would be privately provided, even the roads would be privatized. And so everything would just be... Yeah, and that's that's where often the first thing people say, what about the roads?
We're not going to do the roads.
Yeah, and we won't get into that today. But the broader idea is all of those other things could be provided by the market. And so one way it could be explained is to think, well, if I think the government shouldn't be making cars or food, well, should the government be the one making the legal system as well? And now, in fairness, there's different types of libertarians, right? You've got the minarchist libertarian who believes in a small state, and you've got the anarcho-capitalist who believes in zero government. But to be clear, they still believe in governance. There would still be rules. It would just be determined by private property owners. And over time, there's like a market of rules and laws that form over time. And so And so we think of laws and rights as natural, or some would say God-given, others would just say you just naturally have these rights, as opposed to a kind of a statist conception, which is more like you only have the rights that the government grants to you.
Right.
We sort of view it as logically separate or antecedent or prior to.
Right, I'm writing down a lot of questions.
Yeah,
There's things I want to cover. Just to be clear, is that I agree with everything you said. Like, I am in some ways, I'm in agreement with you. Everything you said is right. That's why I've like referred to myself recently as like a reluctant statist, because I'm still not 100% sure on the practicalities of what you said. And one of the interesting discussions, and people will batter me for saying this, but I heard a very interesting debate between Brett Weinstein and Eric Weinstein, where Eric was talking about the state having the monopoly on violence is a good thing. I'm not saying I agree with him, but I think you have to have the debate to decide whether you think there should be a monopoly on violence, or whether there should be private security forces, etc. So I refer to myself now as a reluctant statist because I agree with everything you say, but I still believe in democracy is the best we have right now. Is that?
Yeah, so I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got some questions because I'm writing down as you were saying this. You haven't explained that thing to me before in terms of private property, in terms of the first to it, which is a really interesting kind of concept.
Yeah.
Do you not think that creates some chronological disadvantage to people who were born today versus people born hundreds of years ago?
Interesting point, right? And so, but let's remember, we also benefit from people who came before us too, right?
Mm-hmm.
They accumulated capital, and that capital is what now allows us to have all of these nice things that our grandparents or great-great-grandparents could never have dreamed of.
Mm-hmm.
Or even a king 200 years ago doesn't enjoy the same technology and access that you and I have now. But to answer your question about property, though, it's essentially what I'm saying is it's more like this is the only way to have a peaceful resolution of these things. Otherwise, property rights are only given in scarce things, and otherwise, only one person can stand on this point at one time. And so we need a way to peacefully and using reason allocate who is the rightful owner of, you own that property, number 3 King Street, and I own number 5 King Street, or whatever. Like this, that's the only way that we see it as a peaceful and prosperous, efficient society that could really work, is that you need a private property theory of rights. And so I guess that's how I would answer that.
Because one of the things it makes me think about is when you think of the nation state, different nations have different resources, whether it's Venezuela has its oil or African countries which have their diamonds or whatever resources they have. And I always think of the resources of the nation as something that can be mined, recovered from the ground and be used to sell into the market to provide things for that nation, to provide something for the people. The first person who gets to it, essentially, well, you probably argue back, actually, the first person gets to it is the state and they're all greedy fuckers. So anyway, but like in my ideal world, that kind of like resources of the nation is something that should be for the people of the nation, the people who are there. So that's why I think that kind of like first to it sometimes creates a disadvantage for people later on, especially in certain societies where you grow up, spent a lot of time in Australia. You weren't born in Australia, right?
Yeah, I was born in Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka, yeah. Somewhere I need to go as well, actually. We've spent most of our lives in fairly rich, prosperous nations.
Yeah.
We've both also had the opportunity to visit other nations where people don't have the same chances. And that idea, like first to it, I just sometimes think there's some people it's harder for them to get onto that ladder. Now I know I'm sounding like a socialist right now, but I'm trying to work through these kind of ideas. And I guess where I'm going with this is that. Well, let me put a different question to you. Are you a minarchist or an anarcho-capitalist?
So I'm in the anarcho-capitalist camp. So basically, I believe that. Now, to be clear, I believe that would be the theoretical ideal. Do I believe it will happen in my lifetime? Maybe not. But I believe that's the general principle. The guiding principle is your property is yours, my property is mine, and let me give you an analogy. It would be like saying we should strive for a society where there's no murder and no rape. Now, people wouldn't come back to you saying, "Oh, see, that's stupid. We'll never have a society with no murder and no rape." Well, the point is, what should we be? What we should aim. We should strive to respect each other's rights and responsibilities and so on. And so that's the sense in which I'm an anarcho-capitalist. but I know, look, probably it may never happen in my lifetime. But if I can incrementally push in that direction, I'll take it, right? If it's a win, if it's an improvement in that direction, I'll take it.
Okay, so without making the 6-month joke, what is the difference between a libertarian and an anarcho-capitalist?
You already knew the joke. But
well,
yeah,
Michael Malice said it to me.
Yeah, but basically, I view libertarianism as the broader category, and then there are subcategories like minarchist, anarcho-capitalist, and maybe even kind of bigger government than minarchist is like kind of the classical liberals who broadly sort of fit into that category as well. So I just see it as like there are some libertarians who believe that the only way it could be done is with a small government state, and that the government should do, the typical, national defense, maybe courts, some of those things where they might
maybe
say,
roads.
And well, the roads is the common joke, right?
But borders.
Yeah.
Maybe some conservation.
Yeah. So they would generally say like it only has kind of traditionally it's like 2 or 3 functions. It's like national defense, maybe police, and maybe courts. That kind of like, and that's pretty much it. And everything else is basically free market. But yeah, and then there are those of us who think that's inconsistent. We believe actually everything should just be privately done. It should be private, even private courts and private national defense. And national defense, I guess, doesn't really make as much sense in that context, but you get the idea, right? Like you might have private defense agencies, and it might be funded through insurance, so there might be some big skyscraper, and that skyscraper will normally need insurance against fire or something else. Well, similarly, it might need defense against an attack. And then guess what? Insurance companies will be the ones who might pull together some of those funds for this little city area, and then that could form part of the defensive budget, if you will. But I also think Bitcoin is going to take us into a world something closer to that. It may not be anarcho-capitalist, but it may be more like Bitcoin citadels, and there'll be, maybe it might superficially look more like a feudal system, like a king or a lord, but I think it might be more like a private opt-in sort of city, right? And so there are people doing this kind of thing. So I've interviewed Titus Gable of the Free Private Cities project. Yeah. That's one example. And I think that's now being led by Rahim Tagiza-Dergan. So I've interviewed Rahim as well. But I think that's also another idea of how this may go in a way that's more libertarian direction, but not necessarily anarcho-capitalist, even if that's the ideal.
Those free private cities, because my problem with the Citadel idea is I think of it as a bunch of people, they've made a whole bunch of money in Bitcoin, they get to go and build their Citadel, they get to put up the walls, and they get to hide from the peasants. It makes me think of the film The Day of the Dead, Ramirez. Is it Ramirez who made the zombie films?
Right, and they're just kind of
Day of the Dead.
They're a little enclosure against the zombies.
Yeah, no, but the great thing with that film is what he did is he created 2 classes, the humans and the zombies were kept out of this kind of like a citadel, essentially speaking. And it kind of makes me think of that as like, is it only for the wealthy? Like, how do you get into the Citadel if you don't have Bitcoin wealth? Are you somebody who's recruited in to come in the day and do jobs, but are you excluded from the Citadel?
Yeah, so it's a hard question, and I would say the way I think about it is I think Bitcoin is generally just going to change the whole world.
Yep.
Right? I think it's going to make the whole world richer, more prosperous, and it is effectively longer term going to make everyone have better rights and better prosperity. But in that, call it short to medium term transition, the Citadel, and if you remember, this even harkens back to the original Citadel's post back in 2013-14. The idea was, there's these rich Bitcoiners and they need to go live in the Citadel because people are after them.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a fan fiction thing. And they were saying, known Bitcoiners were hunted down and, people were going after them. And so maybe we're in trouble, Pete. But the broader idea was more like a protection idea. Now, of course, we joke about it. I sign off every podcast with, I'll see you in the Citadels. But I think there's different conceptions of Citadel, right? Some people think of it as like it's virtual reality, or it's like it's just your home. And then, the idea, it's more like a group of Bitcoin people who want to band together in defense. But also, I think of it like there's going to be like zones of opportunity, right? So in this, maybe an analogy could be like how Hong Kong and Singapore rose up. And then because there was all this economic opportunity there, people wanted to come and work there. Mm-hmm. And they might start off at a quote unquote lower socioeconomic station, but you had a chance to rise up, and people could move and work from different countries all around Asia, and they went to Hong Kong because there was opportunity there.
So it's like a virus that builds from a new set of rules, a new form of governance, and that a bit like Bitcoin is the best form of money. People, when they realize they want to hold it more, the Citadel might be the best form of governance and social cohesion.
And to key into that idea, I see it like it's competitive jurisdictions.
Yeah.
And so it's not
That's
one
good.
citadel, it's many citadels. And then over time, people can experiment and see, this rule went in place at this citadel, but it wasn't here. And this one did way better. So that's a bad rule, And so
It's a bit like the US state system.
yes, it's like competitive federalism. The idea is that people can, if one state is making bad decisions, people will leave.
Which they're doing.
Exactly. And I think the world is morphing into that. And this is kind of like the sovereign individual and related ideas.
Well, we're both thinking about that for different reasons at the moment. So why do you think it's never happened? I mean, you might give me some examples,
Iceland and Wild West, and there's some of these examples that...
do you, because sometimes I think, well, perhaps this is just the natural evolution of human organization. We went, started in caves and we went up through the feudal system, and then we went through different ages, and we are where we are now. Like, statism is one step towards the next system. We keep kind of evolving and learning what works and what doesn't. Why do you think it's not happened?
So yeah, it's a good question. I would say it's like... So there's an analogy people make with this concept called G.K. Chesterton's fence. And it's this idea of, this fence, whatever, we don't see why it's there, let's just remove it. And it's like, no. If you don't know why it was put there, you shouldn't be taking it away, because it might exist for a reason you don't understand, that we don't know. And so I could sort of see an argument where maybe, states have formed in certain ways because we couldn't get past them. But maybe in the future we'll actually have a way to get past them, because we'll have good enough defense and good enough, private defense and private law and private examples that allow people to move on past that. But to answer your question as to why we don't see anarcho-capitalism today, well, there's a few answers there. One is there's no world government. So the countries of the world are effectively in a state of anarchy with each other.
Okay.
That's one example. But the other example is, I think, more of a biological one. So I've seen other leading libertarian, Walter Block, has spoken about his idea, and I kind of agree with it. Maybe there's a biological urge or tendency that we want to be nice. And so what works in a family, which I agree with, right? Within your family, you're not an anarcho-capitalist charging your son for, you look after your son or your daughter, your mum or your father. So what works in the family, being nice and a socialist inside your in that kind of context, doesn't work at a nation level. So the way I view it is, within your family, of course, you're looking after them, or maybe your close friends, you just pay, or you just look after them. But at a nation level, I think it doesn't work. And that's where I think the breakdown is. And so I don't see it like, so for me, my issue is not with hierarchy in general. Mm-hmm. I believe in meritocracy and people who are competent and good producing, and, but for me, it comes down to what is the correct private property theory? What is the right property theory? And my view is more like private property theory, and the libertarian aspect of political philosophy, that's the way we should be thinking about it. That's the just way to do it. It's justice. That's how I say it.
Do you not think that anarcho-capitalists and libertarians should engage more in politics? I know there are political wings of libertarians, and they disagree with those who say you shouldn't.
Yeah.
But like, I've brought this up a few times. My brother says to me, we're in a constant state of anarchy. You have on people on the left, on the right, on the center, you have anarcho-capitalists, so you have libertarians, you have communists, you have Marxists, and everyone's got their kind of idea of how we should organize ourselves, how we should govern. And he said, you kind of get the best you can get by the push and pull from everyone. So the traditional left to right, if you go to socialist, the right end up tending to come in the next elections and campaign based on the fact that you're being taxed too much, and vice versa. When there's a big wealth disparity, the left can come in and try and offer social programs. Do you not think if the libertarians and the anarcho-capitalists engaged in the political process, actually they would have solid arguments to just reduce the size of government and actually start taking society towards a kind of a place that respects property rights?
Right, yeah, it's an interesting way to frame it. And even in the libertarian world, there are big debates on this on this exact topic. So, for example, someone like Dave Smith, right? So he's in the
He's a comedian.
Yeah, he's a
Didn't
comedian.
he represent the Libertarian Party, or was he the press secretary or
So,
something?
I mean, it's one of those things where he's kind of well known within the Libertarian Party, and he's like one of the world's top well known libertarians. And so, someone like him versus the views of, let's say, someone like a good example would be Tho Bishop. So Tho Bishop he works at Mises Institute, and they've had a debate actually on this exact topic. So it was like, should libertarians pursue the political strategy of having the Libertarian Party? Or should they be trying to work inside the Republican Party? And sorry, to be clear, they both believe they should be kind of using some form of political approach. So, for example, Dave Smith inside the Libertarian Party, or Tho Bishop and talking about how there should be the Liberty Republican, right? That there should be like libertarians who should just join the Republican Party and just try to pull it in that direction.
Because they've already got the weight.
Right, to try to do it that way. And then the other angle is more like, no, agorism, right? Do kind of counter economics, right? Or, but I think my thought on this is more like Bitcoin is going to make states a lot smaller, and it's going to force it. How? Because government right now can cheaply print a lot of money. Fiat credit allows big government. And so in my view, once we move to a Bitcoin standard, and who knows when, it could be 10, 15, 20 years from now, we don't know. But I think as that transition happens, debt becomes so much more expensive. And that will force governments to become smaller. So that's really my long-term vision of how this is actually going to play out to give us, in my view, a society closer to a libertarian idea. Even if it's not anarcho-capitalist, fine. It's an improvement over what we have today.
So Bitcoin's a tool to take you towards that allows you to avoid engaging in the political process.
Somewhat, but I see it like you might as well. And so a good example is this whole recent infrastructure bill, right?
Yeah.
So you would have seen, fighting on different sides where people were like, no, I don't even bother engaging with the state. Screw that. And then the other side was more like, look, guys, you can make a call to your congressman or your senator, and you can try to influence this discussion. And so I see it like, Bitcoin is the main tool, right? Stack Bitcoin and bring about the Bitcoin standard. But if you can stave off the worst of the government regulation by making a call, if I was an American citizen, I would have made a call. I viewed it like it would have been a low-hanging fruit. Even though I don't like politics, there's always that saying, just because you're not interested in politics doesn't mean politics isn't interested in you.
Okay.
So I would view it as like a defensive measure to sort of stave off the worst of it while Bitcoin's network effect continues to grow.
How did you end up in this position that you are? What is the background that led you? Because I think everybody's position usually is based on their background, like where they grew up, what their parents are like, etc., etc.
Yeah.
There's a different background, but how did you end up being
a libertarian?
Yeah.
So for me, I was on IRC, Internet Relay Chat, for people who aren't familiar with that. And
Old school.
Yeah, I was like 14 years old, and I was on IRC. I went on some Oz Politics channel, and this guy kept linking to Mises Daily articles. And it was like so different to what I was learning at school, right? Because it was like Mises Institute, all this Austrian economic stuff. And then at school, they're teaching all this Keynesian stuff. And I'm like, this stuff makes way more sense. And so I slowly, I wasn't reading the 1,000-page textbooks or books then at that age. But then later on, so I read Mises Daily, and that puts it into like an article format. And then slowly I just, you slowly laddered up and just thought, yeah, look, I think the Austrians are correct on this, as in the Austrian economists. Yeah. And so that was my journey into becoming a libertarian. And so then so essentially then later Bitcoin happened. This is all before Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And then later I saw Bitcoin and had it explained to me the right way. And that was when it hit it was like, yeah, how could I not be, So that for me, perhaps it's an unusual journey because a lot of people come the other way around. They would have come into Bitcoin and then they would have heard me or Safedine or Reed VJ or, Pierre and people. And then they would have learned a little bit about Austrian economics because of getting into Bitcoin.
That's essentially my journey.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of it before Bitcoin. And now I'm learning in public and asking these questions. I'm asking the questions in public and get yelled at rather than do it privately. Did you have similar questions like I had? I'm assuming you did.
As in,
you didn't just go straight away. Did you have similar questions like I have?
Oh yeah, because here's the other thing, right? I guess broader libertarian questions. I would be like challenging them back, being like, well, hang on, if we had no government, wouldn't there be like gangs roaming the streets and And like, hey, when I was 15 and 16 and 17, yeah, I was going through all these same questions. And then by the time I was about 18 or 19, that was when I was kind of like, yeah, I think anarcho-capitalism is the correct, political philosophy, if you will. Even as I said, it may never happen, but that's the ideal that we should be striving for. And so it takes a lot of reading and work. So you read about, Rothbard talks about private defense agencies, or Bob Murphy has done a lot of talks about the market for security. What would the market for private security look like? And various concepts in that way. And Huntham and Hopper's book, The Myth of National Defense. So it's a mix of all of these things that you read these and you start to think, and sometimes the logic sort of clicks in because it's the same kind of logic. It's the same kind of idea. Well, I don't want the government to make, food. I want the free market to make food. It's the same sort of idea. I want the free market to provide defense and law and all of these things.
But even with all these writings, and I've read, you sent me one recently about COVID, where I was like, wow,
Yeah.
made me rethink a lot of things. And I appreciate all the stuff you send me, because I always read it. I do also say, but this is still theory. These are writings that are theory. There are people out there who will explain to you that Marxism is the best way to govern society, because in theory, for them it works, but in practice, any form of kind of Marxism, communism, is a complete failure and leads to the deaths of millions of people. But isn't in part of this, do you have to accept that this is still theory? It might not play out how Rothbard writes, and how.
Think of it this way, like it's the same kind of logic though, right? It's the same kind of logic that you wouldn't want the government to make to be the baker. You'd want a free market baker. You want a private baker. So it's the same kind of idea. Well, government security, and let's break it down into different problems, right? You've got the law. What is the law? And then what's the security situation? So you might have different, free market courts, judges, and so on, who are helping sort of codify and help apply the law when they make a ruling in a case. And then the police and courts, the police aspect could be maybe replaced with, say, private security or other means of defense, right? And even basic things like, whatever, if it's like security cameras and monitoring technology or guard dogs or whatever, drone defense, who knows, right, in the future. But I think to me, it just comes back to that same idea of we want to privatize as many things as we possibly can. Mm-hmm. That would be the general idea from my point of view. Now I know politically a lot of those ideas are not feasible today in 2021, mm-hmm. but over time, as Bitcoin forces governments to be smaller, then I think the political parties will find more. They'll find more juice. They'll be more able to do that kind of thing because government will have to tighten its belt.
And maybe the fact that Bitcoin is like a creeping force, it becomes like an A/B test. Okay, what are we going to get rid of first? What are the things that we don't need? And because last is going to be defense and security probably.
Yeah.
So it's like, what are the things we don't need? What are these ridiculous departments we're creating, ridiculous regulations?
Exactly.
I think when I was up in Wyoming, I think it was Tyler Lindholm was telling me about, like, you had to get a license to be a hairdresser or something. He was like, this is ridiculous, So let me talk through the ones I've struggled with most, because, like I said, I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. It's that, how does the theory play out in reality? And so I really do struggle with the idea of a non-centralized security. And the reason I struggle with it is when I understand the idea of private security forces, because we have them now. It's like we have a national health service in the UK, but I still have private health. So I understand it. But the interview where Weinstein did with his brother, he talked about one of the best things we did was allow the police to have a monopoly on violence, because I'm not gonna get exactly right what he said, and I know people are listening and gonna be like, what the fuck are you talking about, Pete? I'm doing this for the sake of the debate. But he said is that essentially a centralized police force is responsible to the state, and therefore is the public. Sorry, it's responsible to the public. Therefore, they have to follow a consistent set of rules. I've probably got this completely wrong. My worry is that why would a market for police or a market for security be better than a centralized police?
Yeah, good question. So I would come back at Mr. Weinstein's argument.
Yeah,
So,
let's
or
not
just
attribute to it, 'cause
generally,
I can't remember.
I'd say just generally, think of it like this, right? The same control, and actually I've heard Bob Murphy make this argument. Bob Murphy is the best guy to speak to on this, but I'll give you my interpretation of it, right? So it would be like, imagine you went to a mall, and like we were just teenagers playing in the mall or whatever, mall rats or whatever, and then like maybe you stole a chocolate bar, and then like the security guard comes up and like breaks your arm and like breaks your leg and goes too hard. Guess what happens? There's a market check against that. The mall is going to be like, come on, mate. He's a kid. He stole a chocolate bar. You don't just go break his arm and his leg. You would rightly say you were too harsh there. And so that security company and maybe that security guard would lose their job. And they would choose another security agency or another security guard. It's a similar idea there. So I would see it like there should be a competitive pressure between security forces. And don't forget, they could go too hard or too soft, because it can go the other way too, right? So in San Francisco, they've got that, which you might be aware, or maybe listeners.
$1,000
limit. They're only going to police people who steal over $1,000 worth of stuff.
They go into the shops and they're walking out with.
And so literally you've got people just going in there, and so that's going too soft.
Yeah.
So I view it like you can have a problem either way, too hard or too soft. And so the market over time selects based on the combination of the different preferences of people and the consumers, of the shop owner versus the people who go into that shop versus the people in that area. It sort of selects for what is overall best on balance based on people's individual demands.
That does make sense. We still have that. I mean, in the UK, we have the Independent Police Complaints Commission, who investigate situations with police which, are questionable, whether like someone died in custody, and people do lose their jobs. So that we do have that check and balance. What you're saying is we don't have that competition that who can be the better police force.
Right.
But the switch side to that is we have services provided by centralized police that I wonder if would they be provided by private police forces or private security. So private security is great for things that you want yourself. So I can have a police service that I can call, but I can have a private security on my house. But what about things that the police or investigation agencies do? Where's the incentive to investigate murders? If there was like a serial killer, where's the incentive to clamp down on internet pedophiles or terrorism? Those things where it's kind of like it's something that the whole nation needs.
Yeah, so,
how does that work into this?
So a couple of things there. So think of it like you might have an insurance agency.
Yeah.
And and these different insurance agencies might be contracted to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the way I would think of it, or the way I would explain it as well, is if you can think of a situation where enough humans want something, the market is going to find a way to provide that defense. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like, protection only for the rich. I actually think it might be more like different areas might come up with ways of, hey, let's all chip in, and it might be like kind of like a HOA, or in the same way that a HOA might all chip in for rates. And I know that can sort of look superficially similar to what we have now, but the difference is you can fire them, or you can get a different police force or a security force. And so I see it a little bit more like that. And like I was saying, this is in the context of a society and a world that is going to become so much richer. So we're all going to become a lot richer and can afford these things.
And look, sorry to interrupt, because there's trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to look at the net benefit. Like, is there a net benefit to society? And you might have some things you lose and some things you gain. But I do look at different situations and say, well, we've got things we can compare into the real world. You say like we might have, can poor people afford the security? But people can be greedy, and if we have different neighborhoods, say we have the rich neighborhoods, the middle class, we might also have the poor neighborhoods. Can the poor neighborhoods afford a private police force? Probably not. They might give it up. They might have to self-police. So do we create this divided society where there's certain things that everyone needs and they can't get? And look, the NHS is a great example. A lot of people externally to the UK don't like the NHS. The great thing about the NHS in the UK is everybody has healthcare cover. And yes, we have to steal. We have to steal the tax from other people to pay for it. But it doesn't matter who you are. If you have a problem, you have access to a national health service. And I myself, as somebody with a bit more money, I have private healthcare. So when I bust my back, I've got surgery in 4 days. Yeah. We know, like here in the US, where not everybody has private healthcare because they can't afford it. There are people in situations I know that have had certain operations which have financially ruined them for the rest of their life, or can't afford to get treatments they need. So I kind of feel like this is why I think I like the idea of minarchism, because I feel like there's certain things that are the benefit to being centralized, and I'm still not convinced on police force. I'm convinced on private security. You get it in South Africa. People, they have private security, and people live in, gated neighborhoods. But that is a separation of rich and poor.
Yeah. So let me answer a few of those points. So, firstly, we have to remember the government doesn't necessarily do a good job today for the poor people. There are examples where there's big wait lists. Even in it depends on which country,
They're
right?
bad in the UK.
And there's wait lists in the NHS or in Canada for their system, and so we have to remember that the government doesn't actually provide a great service even as it is today. And so that's one point. And I also think it's fair to point out the government has inhibited the creation of a private market. So because of all the regulation, all the licensing requirements that are there, it actually drives up the cost. And so probably here in the US is another good example. Because of various tax compliance or tax laws, they made the insurance happen through employers. And so now here in America, it's all about, who's your employer? Because who are they? They need to be providing you the health insurance. Well, guess what? If we had a fully free market in insurance and a fully free market, the cost for health would have been far cheaper. And so that would have made it accessible in that way. And another example as well, I was just recently in Colombia, right? And we met a Bitcoiner who came from a poorer area of Colombia, and he was saying there are some areas there where the police literally do not even go. And that is a state already. They're already paying tax, and they aren't getting protection right now. So it's hard for me to, I guess, believe this idea that somehow, the government is going to provide for all, when already the government is here today in many countries around the world, 200 of them, and there are a lot of people who don't get protection and who don't get healthcare, or they've got a huge wait time for healthcare, or the cost of the healthcare is raised dramatically, even for the private people.
But what I wonder is, are those places like you were in Colombia, are they gradually, as the wealth increases in the nation, getting more directionally towards what we have in the UK and you have in Australia? And it's, they are getting better. And could we potentially, under libertarian ideas, see places like the UK get gradually worse because we create this divide? Like, health is a tricky one because that isn't as black and white for me as, say, security. Right. Security, I do struggle with that idea. I do think we create the have and have not too much in terms of like private security, and I think certain places can end up just becoming like violent ghettos without a standardized police force, because if it comes down to who can afford it, some people just will have to forego certain services. So I think for me, security and health are slightly different. There's no question there on that one.
Right. So but think of it like this. Like, remember, already a lot of these people are paying right now.
Yeah. A lot of tax.
So, we're paying a lot of tax, and the government is not necessarily providing a great service. And I think the important thing is always to think about what would the alternative be, right? So imagine if there were no government, would we just put our hands up and say, oh, well, guess we'll all die now? No, we would have private security. We would put in some effort into that. And here's the other thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a for-profit venture. It could be, under anarcho-capitalism, it is totally reasonable that you might have a neighborhood security, right? There might be sort of like we're living in the town together, and we all voluntarily do like a neighborhood watch thing. There's all sorts of different ways it could be done. And so the way I'm thinking about libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism is more this idea that people can try things in different areas, and then once you see it works, it works there, let's replicate that here. And we're just going to do that all over the world. And so even with even with COVID or whatever, you see, this treatment worked there, let's try it here, whether it's whatever other things.
So how much of this is you think that this is a more efficient system, and how much of you is based more on the morality of nobody having...
Good question. Yeah, good question. So there are different approaches in the kind of libertarian world on this. So some people are more what we would say deontological. So they're saying, even if it caused a worse world, I would still believe in this because that's the justice. That's just.
So I don't agree with that one.
Right, but that's kind of one way you could frame it.
The reason I don't agree with that one is because I think humans organize themselves. So whilst that person thinks that, other humans are going to organize themselves and say, well, that's not better, so we're not going to have that.
Yeah, so that, but to be fair, that's kind of like a steel man of a position
I know.
where, right? But I think most of those deontological libertarians happen to also believe it would be more efficient, right? So
Right.
they believe that it is actually the just and efficient way. But then there are others, like someone like, say, a David Friedman. He might be more in the kind of consequentialist camp, where he might not necessarily be making a moral argument like the deontological guys would, but he might argue it more like, just even on a utilitarian basis, we would be better off, and so that's why we should pursue that approach. And then perhaps the third bucket is someone like a Michael Humer, who might make an argument more like it's common sense. It's like the same way that you or I would treat each other is the way that the state should be treated by us, that it should have no special rights. It should not have the ability to compel us to pay it taxes or to obey its rules, just like you and I don't have to obey each other's rules above and beyond, say, the private property aspect of it. Like if I'm on your house, I need to obey your rules, kind of thing.
But what if people don't want this? Because that's the tricky thing. It's like you've explained to me, and like I said, I agree with you. And
Yeah.
I know I'm like a fairly decent person. I'm not a violent person. I'm honest, and I don't. If I have an arrangement with you, I'm going to pay you, and etc. etc. Like I know I'm like that. There's a lot of shitty people in the world as well who aren't like that. Who this kind of society would be an opportunity for them to exploit people. Is there a way? Have you ever, or is there any discussions in your communities that you can coexist between those who want statism and those who want anarcho-capitalism?
So think of it like this: the whole world, if it were anarcho-capitalist, there's nothing stopping everyone opting into a socialist commune or something like that. But we aren't allowed to have what we want, living in a broader socialist world.
Yeah.
Like, so there's actually an imbalance there, right? But I think this almost brings us back to the Citadels thing, because it almost is like a lot of Bitcoiners and libertarian people. Often Bitcoiners are libertarian-minded, though not all of them are. But many of them are minded of this mindset that the world is not going to give us what we want, so we're going to go Galt, right? We're going to go off and create our own. And so that's where some of this idea of the Citadel comes from a little bit, because they think, you know what, this government is not giving us a good deal. We're going to go over and create our own little thing, or at least try to opt out along little ways that we can. Now, there's different ideas around this. I think the broader idea is more like the broader world is going to change, because the political environment, landscape is going to change because of Bitcoin.
Have you had any new questions today, or is this the stuff you get asked every time?
Oh no, I think it's. I mean, I think it's like it's kind of like an interesting mix of like Bitcoin and liberty. How do these things mix, and what is it going to look like 5, 10, 15 years down?
I feel like I'm just figuring it out as I go.
Yeah.
Over time, and like different things click. I've had a couple of people write to me and say that I think you're a minarchist, Pete. You're a minarchist. You need that a little bit of state stuff. Okay, well, let's talk about Australia.
Yeah. Oh, it's crazy.
Okay, because that is the I told you so moment. Because like Australia's so fucking weird, man. Like I grew up thinking Australia was like this really cool kind of relaxed country where people just surf and play sports and everyone's cool with each other. And then the more I've learned over the last kind of 3-4 years, it's certainly more authoritarian than the UK.
Yeah.
The controls over the press. What's happened during the COVID, the brutality of the police, the rules, some of the mental things that you're seeing politicians say.
Yeah.
Did I see today about someone about in Queensland, they're creating a quarantine camp?
Yeah.
And it's just like, these things, you look at them going, this looks like a Nazi concentration camp. It does. I mean, I know it isn't the same, and we shouldn't compare everything to the Nazis. What's going, like, has Australia always been like this? I'm not sure how long you lived there, or is this like a recent, 5-10 year thing?
So I went to Australia as a 2-year-old.
2-year-old. So
and I was there for over 30 years.
Yeah.
So I grew up there.
Yes, your whole life.
And basically my whole life I was there. Now I've recently left Australia, and I'm basically not planning to go back anytime soon, but absolutely the culture was on the down, right? And so if you ask people outside Australia, what's your conception of Australia? They would have said, Paul Hogan and Crocodile Dundee and this kind of alpha charismatic guy. And think of the big Australian exports, right? Hugh Jackman, Chris Hemsworth, these kind of, jovial, kind of easygoing characters who always like, they don't take themselves too seriously. That was the perception of Australia. And I think the culture was on a serious downtrend. So
You know why?
I think it's a few things. But if I had to guess, Australia has gone complacent. That's the short answer. So Australia was the lucky country. They had no recession for 27 or 28 years, something ridiculous. And I think what happened is they got complacent and they gave up the guns in 96. And that
was after a mass shooting, right?
Yeah, so there was a Port Arthur mass shooting, and basically the right-wing or centre-right politician at that time, or Prime Minister, John Howard, took away the guns. And because he was from the right-wing party, and obviously all the left-wing side were going with it, so that was essentially what happened. And I think from there, it was coasting off inertia. And so, growing up, and I'm sure, people lived more brutal lives. Like, they just did. Like, that was just a fact, right? We've created, maybe the world has created this kind of super safe society. And now, because everyone's looking for a reason to be offended, everyone's looking for a reason they're not safe, now they're starting to impose things that just would have been completely unheard of. And so this notion that you stop people from seeing their own family when they're dying, people stopping their weddings, funerals, all kinds of things. And all of these things have been going on in Australia. And because Australians have been so coddled and they just became complacent. So that in my view is what's happened. That's kind of the short answer. So think of it this way. Yeah. If COVID happened 15 years ago, no chance this would have happened in Australia. But the constant degradation, and there's a few factors that go into it, right? Some of it's global, some of it's Australia. I would say part of it is the news. So the news they've lost their budgets and lost their revenues that they normally had. So now they get a lot of clickbait from driving fear. And because they drove a lot of fear at the start, most of the population believes, we locked down and look how good we are. And if anything happened, it's because they didn't lock down hard enough or early enough. That's the conversation.
Yeah, we've had, how many deaths in Australia?
I haven't even checked.
I'm assuming it's like tens or hundreds.
Yeah, it's pretty low.
Yeah, whereas the UK is 140,000, we say...
With or from, that's the debate.
We're saying 4 to 5 million globally. Australia can say, look, we're a success here. And there are people who defend that. I've seen it this week on Twitter. I've seen people defend it and said, look, I'm still fairly free. I'm locked down occasionally, but we have saved many, many lives in Australia. They have a point, whether you agree or not, they have a point, which is a point you can debate on. It's like, but you, obviously it's not going to work for you because you're a libertarian, but what the weird thing for me about Australia is like, what's the end game here?
So they seem to think, just get the vaccine up and...
we know that doesn't work.
But it doesn't even work. I mean, if you look at Israel...
So let me just... The vaccine works, but you have to have the nuance. Okay, it reduces deaths and it reduces sickness. Okay, I'm saying that from the data I've read, that's factual. But at the same time, you can still get sick and you can still get COVID if you are vaccinated. You can still pass it on. And you can still pass it on. So if the vaccines were 100% effective, if it gave genuine, it was a genuine immunity from it. Immunity? That's... Yeah. Then you could see the logic of the argument. But the logic
now it makes no sense.
It doesn't make any sense. So I'm like, what's the end game here?
So politicians made an error. They should never have locked down. But Ron DeSantis put it well. He's saying, they're making you cover your face so they can cover their ass. They screwed up. They made a big mistake and they don't want to walk it back. And because they've scared the population, put them into hysteria, and that's why I call it Hysteria 19, right? So I'm not a COVID denier in that sense. I believe it is a real virus. I believe it's something like 2 or 3 times what a flu season is. So society should have done 2 or 3 times what they do for a flu. They should not have done 100 or 1,000 times what they've done for a flu season. And that's the problem. But they don't want to admit that. And so because that's been, even if I look back at the media in Australia, the way they talk about it is like, see, you just didn't contact trace hard enough. And then because there are some people who have been so pushed into this state of fear and they've been told, they've been shielded the vaccine harder and harder, they think the way out is, see, you just need to mandate the vaccine and then we're all going to be out of this. But it's not. It's not going to do it. But now...
They're going to have to mandate it in Australia.
They basically are. Because if you look at what's going on, especially in New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian has said, if you're fully vaccinated, now you're going to have a little more freedom than the non-vaccinated.
That was unbelievable. You tweeted that out, right?
Yeah.
That was unbelievable.
History will not judge Gladys well for that.
No.
They are really going down a bad pathway. And that's why I left, and I'm probably not going back. But I really feel for family and friends back there in Australia and in Sydney and everywhere else.
But that statement was very much like, you only have the freedoms that we give you.
100%. And so, as a libertarian, my view of rights is they are inalienable. And that's maybe more of an American conception of rights.
Yeah.
They are inalienable. The government does not give you rights. It's on the government not to impinge on your rights.
This is what Zubu was talking about with Rogan the other day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, negative rights.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like a common libertarian framing of rights, is that it's a freedom from, not a freedom to. So that's another way to put it, right? So, yeah, so ultimately, the problem is in Australia, they don't have a principled base on these things. They just they were lucky. They were the lucky country. They got lucky, they were kind of broad-minded, egalitarian-minded, and now when something hit, they didn't have the right principle about them, and they didn't have that same level of like fight back or resistance that now a lot of them are docile. So I don't know the latest numbers, right? But when I saw some numbers back in, say, May or like that, it was something like 20% of the population wanted more restrictions, 60% were okay with that level, like before going back into lockdown, and then only 20% wanted less restrictions. So in other words,
80%.
Most of the population, 80% of the population were kind of okay with it or wanted more restriction.
Do you think I think you would say that's because of fear, but do you not also think there are other people who are just like, look, I like being part of a society. I like being part of a society that agrees that will function together, will make decisions together for the best of everyone. That's not me defending it. I'm just saying, do you not think that...
So I understand why people can think it's like that, but here's the thing. And again, this goes into more similar to that idea of like, why are so many people socialists? Is because of that biological urge. They think, oh, I've got to protect, or I've got to, it's my family, I've got to look after them. But they don't understand by doing this, they're causing more unseen deaths. But it just takes a real, you have to actually think that through, right? Because without wealth, at the extreme level, people starve. But without wealth as well, people might be losing jobs, families might be breaking down, people might lose their businesses that they spent decades building up. And so it's going to cause future deaths, but they won't necessarily be COVID ones. And there'll be other deaths. There'll be deaths from things like undiagnosed cancer.
Oh, but they're happening. We know they're happening.
Yeah.
Suicides and...
And the suicide call, the interesting stat I heard was the suicide hotline, I'm not sure if it's New South Wales or Australia, hit a 57-year high. That's how many people are dialing into the Lifeline suicide hotlines.
Because the people creating the rules, they're not affected. They're still paid.
And here's the other factor to bring in. Over time, the growth of the state, there are a lot more people getting paid by the state. So they're getting a check either way. So they either work directly for the government, they're getting some kind of job keeper, job seeker, like welfare payment. And so a lot of them have been placated with that. And so fiat money has allowed governments of the world to kind of disregard the consequences or to act like there are no consequences for not working. Whereas if you look at, say, the poorer countries or the countries reliant on tourism, they are more open. Why? Because they know where their bread is buttered. They know they have to stay open because, yes, there might be some COVID deaths, but you're causing more deaths elsewhere in other ways, just in unseen ways. And so because of the massive panic and hysteria, it became COVID monomania. It's like the only thing that matters is COVID, nothing else. No other health outcomes, no other life outcomes matter now in the COVID hysteria age.
I think people struggle to change their mind on things.
That's
that kind of like...
It's hard to flip back.
It's a really poor human quality when I did. We literally had the Twitter debate the other day where somebody brought up something I'd said and I said, no, I've changed my mind on that. I got it wrong. It feels like it's almost like politicians can't ever change their mind because...
Well, sometimes that means they get voted out, or their party will oust them because, you were wrong there, right? And so you can sort of understand in that sense, obviously I don't agree with them, but you can understand from their point of view why they're bullishly trying to just charge on through. And now they're trying to slowly, and they keep pushing the goalposts, right? There's been constant goalpost shifting. Obviously, 2 weeks to stop the spread. What are we now? 16 months, 18 months? Into 2 weeks to stop the spread?
Yeah, but also we're part of that. I think sometimes you have to say that it was like an evolving situation. when I put out that tweet that pissed a lot of people off, the reality was we were seeing those videos of people dropping dead in China, which we know are bullshit. Well, I don't know where that came from. That kind of makes you think like something else is going on here, because nobody else has had people dropping dead. But also, Italy got hit bad early on, and the hospitals were overrun. So at the point where the UK was looking, like, there were things that weren't looking great. And trying to figure these things out as somebody who works for the government, it must be hard. Because okay, you're a libertarian, so you don't give a fuck. But like people who do work in government, who believe in the state, who believe in looking after their constituents, they're trying. Some of them, I know not everyone agree, but there are people there who do want to do the best for their constituents. I don't believe every politician is an evil person who wants control and power. I believe there are people out there who understand their duty as a politician and want to do good. And I think they've had to make some tough decisions, and then sometimes they've had to change their mind. And they're doing it at a time where people are disagreeing with it. It's almost like you get yelled at on Twitter sometimes, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'd get it.
We all
it's
get
because
it.
people disagree. And if you're in power and government, you've got a lot of people disagree with you. You've got people on different political spectrums. So I think they have a tough job.
Yeah, but I think, here's the thing. I think a lot of them are hiding. You know why? They're doing the cover your ass. They are basically just saying, oh, look, this is the best health advice. No, politicians are not meant to just look at one thing.
No, I agree.
They're not balancing across all of society. And so think of it this way. They are trading off their long-term for a short-term gain, right? Think of it this way.
Fiat decisions.
Exactly. Because if you're an Australian politician, particularly, or New Zealand politician, guess what? Less people are going to move to Australia. The talent is going to move out of Australia. Who's going to go and set up a business in Australia now when you could get locked down at the drop of a hat? People can't plan their weddings, they can't even have a funeral if their mum dies or whatever. They just can't plan events. What kind of a life is that? There are people stuck in their homes who have no idea, they have no light at the end of that tunnel.
Yeah.
They literally just feel like, I'm stuck here, I don't have a pathway out. My overlords gave me 1 hour of freedom to go buy my groceries for the day. Wow. And I've got to wear a mask, which doesn't work. And I've got, they're forcing the vaccine onto us, and I won't get my freedoms back unless 80% of us take the vaccine. That is coercion. That is vaccine blackmail.
Yeah, that coercion one's a real tricky one, because I've been very public. I'm vaccinated, and I support the idea of vaccinations for certain demographics. And I don't like too much of there are certain people I believe should just get vaccinated. Absolutely.
Right. So maybe older people,
Yeah.
maybe like unhealthy people with comorbidities. Right. But young, healthy, no.
Well, there are stats out there. There are stats, and there's stats we don't know. There are knowns and there are unknowns. But I support that idea. But I fundamentally disagree with vaccine passports. I fundamentally disagree with any coercion around this. I mean, we've had some. Is it this week? Today in the US, they announced that you cannot get on a plane if you've not been.
So they're looking at a law to do that, which would be horrible. I mean,
people will get vaccinated who didn't want to.
Yeah, and a lot of people are getting vaccinated not because they're worried about COVID, but because of the government rules. And you've got. I'm sure you're familiar with the example of thalidomide, right?
Yeah, of course.
So, which is like the famous example on this, right? It was like a drug they gave to pregnant women, and those children turned out with like malformed arms and legs and things. And they only found out years later. Who are we to know? How do we even know? Like with some of these vaccines, if they don't, maybe you won't die straight away, but maybe they'll harm your immune system.
Well, yeah, I mean, so look, I get a lot of emails about this.
Right.
I've had some quite supportive emails because I've been pro, and I've taken a lot of flack. I've had doctors and virologists get in touch, and they've I'm not going to give the answers because I don't have it, but they've said there is a lot of nonsense around this. Firstly, it's not a gene therapy like people say it is, and actually these technologies have been tested quite a bit, and actually the long-term risk, yes, we don't have long-term testing, but the long-term risk is very low. These have been extensively tested. I almost feel like I wish I had someone who could answer it. I think the bigger point is whether or not you and I can relay the right information about the risk. It's about actually personal choice, because I was reading today about a radio presenter in the UK. She got vaccinated after the first dose, she got blood clots, and she died. And they said, I think it was 419 cases and 73 people have died. Now, there is a trade-off. There will be people who haven't got vaccinated, who've got COVID and died. So it's worth knowing the numbers of both and being able to make that decision. But the point being is, if you are forced to take a vaccine
that's totally
and
wrong.
you die, you've died because you've been coerced. If you've chosen not to and you get COVID and you die, at least you had to make that choice, and that was your choice to make.
Yeah,
and
but
I
you
think
should have the choice either way. That's the
Exactly.
point,
The
right?
choice should
I see
exist.
it like and that's the weirdest thing. There's been so much abuse and media thrown, like the way the media portray this, right? I'm an anti-vaxxer or whatever because I believe in pro-choice, right? I've had every vaccine, I've had every other vaccine, but because I believe that you should have a choice on this one, I'm now all of a sudden I'm an anti-vaxxer, right? Whether I took it or not, I believe you should have the choice.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the important thing for me. And so that's been so frustrating as well. And look, if you look at the media portrayal of these things in Australia, they're like, oh, this guy, he was positive on COVID test, and they're like doing a manhunt for this guy.
The guy went missing.
He was like in an elevator or something. I don't know, but like, and the media are like helping drive this whole thing, and it's like the people in the media have no self-awareness.
Is there a certain situation where you would say, okay, something centralized? Well, no, I'm going to say it, and I know what your answer is going to be, but people will make their own decisions based on this. But, for example, we're in Texas right now, and Texas has been pretty open with regards to removing the mandates for masks, and it's pretty much opened up. The only people who seem to be wearing masks are people at work.
Yeah.
But the hospitals are filling up. We know ICUs are full. We know they're running out of beds. I know this again because doctors are writing to me saying people need to see what's going on in these hospitals. We're dealing with this. They're building extensions into car parks, etc. Is there ever a scenario where you think like a centralized response is required? I know, for example, when we have Ebola outbreaks in Africa, there is a centralized response, and they literally lock areas down. Is there ever a scenario like?
I don't know. Well, I think even in the Texas example, or even in other examples around the world, I've heard of examples where literally some staff are quitting because of a vaccine requirement, and then that's causing the shortage in staff, which in turn causes the shortage in the hospital because they don't have.
It doesn't. That doesn't cause a shortage in the beds. The beds are the number of beds.
I mean, broadly speaking, I see it like, to the broader question that you're asking, I see it like let's say the Citadel manager or someone would be the one to make that decision. And, and again, it would be more like competitive jurisdiction. So you would see some that kind of...
We're not there yet, though.
Yeah, right. But even now, you would say different governments, and you would look and compare. But I guess in an ideal world, we would see more honest media, right? Who would talk about, oh, look how bad these lockdowns have been, or look how these different counties in the same state one had a mask mandate, the other didn't, and they had like the same curve. No one is like, very few people are raising those kinds of questions and talking about those things.
The worst thing is trying to get accurate data, because whatever your bias is, you can find the data that suits you. That's what I've found. I've literally done it. I've done it. I've gone and looked at certain issues, and I've Googled based on whether I'm pro or whether I'm con, and I can find data that supports me. And it's really tricky.
Think of it this way. Here's how I think of it. There should be a presumption in favor of private property and liberty.
Agreed.
So in order for somebody to justify a lockdown or a mask mandate or any of these restrictions, they need to be the one to prove the evidence. They can't just kind of be like, oh, it might help. Oh, this, it sounds like a good idea. No, you need to prove it.
But hold on. When they do prove it, you say, well, you can't trust government data.
Well, okay, so some people are like that, but I'm saying even like taking government data, like there are people like Ian MSC on Twitter. If you look him up, he's got all these charts showing like different states or counties or whatever, and or different countries showing that curve. And oftentimes people deny. There's a whole bunch of things they deny. They deny seasonality. They deny natural immunity. They kind of push this idea that asymptomatic spread is a thing, when really, if they had just said, hey, if you have symptoms, stay home, that probably would have like done most of the work, right? And it's weird that, but they just don't allow for this. They think the only way it got better is because of vaccines and masks and restrictions. They never say, oh, what about natural immunity? And then the conversation about natural immunity versus vaccine immunity comes in too. Yep. Because there are people, and it's like some of the studies coming out of Israel now are saying that natural immunity is way better than vaccine immunity.
If you survive and get natural immunity.
Well, I mean, here's the other thing. Like, we've got to, and again, we have to zoom out, right? Just like in Bitcoin, we have to zoom out, right? Do you know how many people die every year, just on average?
In the world,
Yeah.
about 65 million.
Yes, correct, right?
Do you want to know how I know that?
I don't know.
Because isn't it weird that I can answer it?
Oh, yeah.
Because, like, could you have answered that? It's Zuby did it on Rogan's show literally the other day. I was like, oh, wow,
right.
65 million.
Yeah, because I was tweeting this out a while back. I was saying, look, you guys, we have to look at the broader numbers, right? About 0.75% of the population, so 60 million out of 8 billion, die every year. Just normal causes.
Yep.
And it's all out of proportion, right? Because if you look at how many people are dying of non-COVID causes, it's way higher.
Yeah.
So the world shouldn't be like monomaniacally focused on COVID.
Well, but again, it's slightly different. You know, it's like when you hear people say, "Oh, well, heart disease is a big killer. We should ban." Yeah, but the thing is like we are talking about something that can kill you that you can spread to other people. Like you can. I think we at least need to accept that. You don't have to agree with the points, but you at least need to accept that in the debate. Is that okay? If it was Ebola right now, you know, that kind of level, people would be very scared and keeping away from each other. So we do have something whereby being in the same room with somebody, if I had COVID, you could get it today, you could leave and have COVID because of me. That is a slight difference than, say, heart disease.
Yeah, I get you. But I mean, even the broad numbers, right? So many more die of heart disease than of COVID, or like the 60 million who die every year, just globally. And the other factor as well is even if you look at things like from a qualis point of view, quality adjusted life years, right? Every 20-year-old who suicides because they couldn't go to their events or have a wedding or whatever, they had 60 years left to live.
Hey, listen, no, I agree with you. I totally agree with you on that point.
Right? Whereas like the lives you're saving, the lives who are dying of COVID, it's like people who are over 80.
Yeah.
Our life expectancy is like 81 or whatever, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, I struggle with that one as well because like sometimes I think, well, my dad's 73 and I don't want him to die.
Of course not. But I mean, of course, life is precious, right?
Yeah,
but I think there's a concept of a good innings, right?
Yeah.
That like someone who is 15 or 20, they should have their chance.
Do you know what number you would take? If you were offered the chance, what number you would take? What age? I'll give you that now.
Oh, I mean, the average life expectancy is like 81.
So would you, if you were offered 81, would you take it? Or do you think you'd say, no, I think I can beat it?
Well, as in, personally, do I think I will? Yes. But I mean, I would
take 81 in a heartbeat.
Yeah, but I mean, 81 is like, that's a good innings as far as I'm concerned. That's like you had your chance. But all these other people, the rest of the world are struggling because we want to give like another 4 months to the 81-year-old and like destroy the lives of the 20-year-old.
I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. Like, I don't think people are there saying, let's just save the 80-year-olds. So I think they're thinking, let's save the teenagers who die, very small number, and then the people in the 20s, slightly bigger numbers, and the 30s, like it's a scaling number. I don't think they're saying let's just save the 80-year-olds. I don't think people are saying that.
Right, but I'm saying that most of the people who are dying are like older, right? Yeah, there's some younger people, but
the numbers are changing though.
Yeah, but often, if you look at and here's the other thing, this is another thing the media won't talk about, is the obesity rates, right?
Yep.
Obesity stats are obesity is a massively bigger risk factor. Okay, here's a crazy counter example. Imagine I said, hey, you know what, Peter? We're going to do fat camps. Anyone who's obese, mandatory fat camp. You're only allowed to eat the carnivore diet and you can lift weights. We got a gym there and cardio and you can eat as much meat and you can lift weights until you're slim again or until you're healthy weight. I bet you that intervention, although I still in principle disagree with it, I would save more lives than all the COVID stuff.
Yeah, but it's not. I think it's a poor analogy in that person, their weight and their food choices is an individual choice that doesn't affect others. We are talking about something where individual choices can affect a lot of people and change the economy. So if you have, so for example, people talk about waiting lists. The waiting lists are going to be huge again in the UK because we've stopped doing operations, etc., etc. There is a flip to that also. So here in Texas at the moment, ICU beds are filling, hospitals are filling with people coming in who've got breathing problems, got COVID. Also, operations are still being delayed because of that as well. There is a flip. I always think if you're going to look at one, you've got to look at the other.
So here's my answer then. I would say the world is doing it out of proportion, right?
That I don't disagree
Ultimately,
with,
that's my point.
Be fair.
Because we've had bad flu seasons in like other years gone by. Did we like shut down the world for those? No. And so I think the world just is not set up to operate on this idea that you might be an asymptomatic spreader, so you got to take a test before you fly and you got to do.
Have we had like a global flu season which has affected almost every country in the world with millions of deaths and hospitals filling up like COVID. I don't think we've had.
We
I
have
think
had
we've had
hospitals overfill though.
yeah,
in years
but
gone by.
it's pockets.
Yeah.
It's pockets, but it's not a global situation where you can go to Brazil and hospitals are full. You go to Ecuador, hospitals are full. You go to Dallas,
I don't know.
hospitals.
I wouldn't know the numbers, to be fair.
But so I've seen it brought up before, and I've seen this flu things. Yes, we have had it. We've had it in the UK, but they're pockets. It's not like a global issue.
I wouldn't know the specific numbers, so I
Yeah.
couldn't really say. But I think the broader point to me is that the world has never operated on this idea that, like, just by us talking, right, that we should like put controls on our infectious disease.
No.
Like, I'm sorry, like we have immune systems and we have to like just live with it. That's always been the way. And also, I guess bringing it back to the libertarian idea is more like it should be the private property owner's choice.
Well, we look.
Yeah.
I'm vaccinated. I don't know if you are. I assume you're not. But we've made the decision to have this conversation. Alex here has made the decision. You know, even though I'm vaccinated, I could have it and carry it and pass it to you. We've made those personal choices.
Yeah.
I went to a florist recently with my daughter. She's getting some flowers for her mum for her birthday. We got there. She said, "You got a mask?" I said, "No." She said, "My 87-year-old mother's working inside. Can we serve you at the door?" Fine. I agree with everyone making these choices. I totally agree with that. I do, though, think there are certain things that we have to consider or just think about. Just have to have the discussion.
So for me, it's more like if it was serious enough, you wouldn't need the government to tell us about it. You know?
Well, I've heard that. I have heard that argument, but Florida's opened up pretty much. Texas opened up pretty much. Right now, they're both quite serious situations in terms of ICUs filling.
Yeah. I think seasonality. My answer would be seasonality. Like I think you're going to see a season come, and then it'll go, and then
maybe in time will prove that. But if the whole of the US was opened like that, and all ICU beds across the country were filled up, maybe they are, maybe they wouldn't. I think we would know. I'm not saying we should have. See, my issue is where's the middle ground?
the middle ground is not necessarily going to be the right answer. Right?
Not necessarily, but what I'm saying is this is where I'm kind of agreeing with you. The politicization of this is the problem. Yeah. New York's gone totally one way. You have to be mandated.
Yeah,
so you're mandated
crazy.
to come in if you want to go to restaurants. So basically, if you've not double jabbed, there's no point going to New York.
Yeah.
You come to Texas, completely open. ICUs are full in Dallas, or here where we are in Dallas. Like, maybe there's some middle ground where it's like, if you aren't trying to prove a political point, you would deal with things rationally in a different way. So maybe is it DeSantis here?
Well, anywhere?
Here in Texas, DeSantis.
No, Abbott.
Abbott's the governor
of Texas.
but DeSantis
is Florida.
Yeah, DeSantis is Florida. That's it.
Yeah.
DeSantis or Abbott, whoever it is. Sorry to American listeners, I don't know these. Maybe they would make decisions slightly differently. So maybe Abbott wouldn't be completely open. Maybe they would make just slightly different decisions. Maybe if de Blasio wasn't trying to make virtue signal for what New York should have, they'd make slightly different decisions. I feel like the politicization is why we're seeing those two. Well, we're seeing those two extremes.
Yeah,
we're seeing those two extremes, and like I accept the reality of the state, and therefore I want to try and have an opinion about what they should do better, rather than just solve it from a libertarian angle, which doesn't exist.
So here's how I would say it. Think of it even with the the Fabian socialists and that, they didn't get what they wanted by just kind of asking for a little bit. They asked all the little bit and conceded a little, and just kept conceding, and just kept creeping up. And because of that underlying biological tendency we mentioned earlier, they managed to get a lot of what they wanted. Governments today are massive compared to 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Things that are almost, it's almost seemed like a crazy right-wing position now, but that might be what your granddad believed, right? It's crazy that it's gone that way. But governments have become so powerful, and it's just hard to explain to people, because it's like, it's like that old saying about there's two fish swimming in the water and they don't even know. One of them is asking the other, and he's like, "What's water?" He's like, he doesn't understand that's the water we're swimming in. We're just living in this world where governments are so extremely powerful compared to before. And their power of surveillance, their power of all these things is so much more advanced compared to what people could have dreamed about 100 years ago.
Do you have any doubts yourself? Do you ever still question parts of libertarianism? You think, well, I'm just not sure if I've got this
I
right.
mean, there's like some areas where you kind of like, okay, maybe like the treatment of children, right? Like that's probably one of the common ones that comes up in like
social services to protect children.
Yeah, or like let's say this idea that you should be looking after your children, but if people were to abuse children, how would you protect them? Like from an outside perspective, like So there's little things in there.
Where does age of consent come from in the libertarian side?
Yeah, so that's I guess depending on the conception of that law, like it could be like the law of that citadel, if you will, or it could be like the custom, or it could just be sort of more like a.
What if you're not in that citadel?
Yeah, so these are some of the harder questions. That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
These are the kind of the harder ones where, like,
I don't want it to be a gotcha, by the way.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and I think I openly say, like, these are potentially some of the areas where maybe it's not as clean and precise as an answer as just kind of like non-aggression principle, your property versus my property. Those are very clean cut answers. So that's kind of some of the areas where I'd say libertarianism in general that's probably one of the areas where we're not as precise as I would like to be, but I still think on net it's the most it makes the most sense. So that's how
it's where we come back to the net good, the net of the whole system. You can't just because of one thing, but it's like, how do you get to that? How do you get to that? There's like a ethical age of consent, but some places in the US it's 18, the UK it's 16, other countries it's 14.
Or even drinking age, right? Another example, similar kind of thing. So
there would be no drinking age in
maybe
it just wouldn't exist, would it?
Well, I mean, not by a government, but maybe your insurance agency says, "Oh, we're not going to give you health insurance unless you make sure your child doesn't." There could be other forms of that, right? So there could be private mechanisms, right? Like, so people think, oh, in the libertarian world, there'd be like no seatbelt rules or no driver's license or no insurance requirements. But no, remember, the road is privately owned. So that road owner is going to say, you're not allowed to go on my road unless you have insurance unless you hit some other guy or whatever, right? Or seatbelts or, different rules, right? So it's a similar kind of thing where over time, I think the market of people will come up with norms and rules and customs and say, okay, age of consent is whatever, or age that you can drink is this.
Yeah, I think that's why I come back to the minarchism thing, because I like in minarchist world we can solve it and go, okay, age of consent is 18, we have that rule, go fuck yourselves, you can't mess with that. We can have agencies that protect children, and we can have maybe a centralized police force. I feel a lot more comfortable in that world.
Well, look, I mean, from my point of view, that would be less bad than what we have now. So I would take it.
Win.
I would take that. That would be a massive win, right? It wouldn't be ideal, but it would be better than what we have now. So I can take that, right? For me, my approach is more just like whatever we have now, just push in a better direction, right? So I know we're not going to have anarcho-capitalism tomorrow, but if we can sort of push it in that direction, privatize things, make the state smaller, I'll take it.
It's like Eric Vorty said to me years ago. He said, if we could just 1% smaller every year, 5% smaller every year would be...
Yeah, similar idea, right? Like, basically, you should be out there trying to deregulate things and trying to lower the taxes. And I think, in reality, the practical way this happens is more the competitive jurisdictions thing. So this idea of, going overseas to get a better tax rate or, to all that sort of stuff.
Which is all happening right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You're traveling, I'm traveling.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going more nomad now, and I think this is kind of the way you... And here's the thing. This is... For anyone who's, like, earning enough money, it starts to make a lot of sense to think about these things. Because if your income, and depending on the tax rules of your country, whatever, depending on that, it could be a huge saving. So an interesting stat from the Sovereign Individual, they were saying... I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was saying if you could get a 10% rate of return and compounding for 40 years, it was like for every $5,000 of income or something it's like millions of dollars.
Yep.
And, money's not everything in this world, but it means, let's say you did this at 20 or 30 and you compare back to when you're 60 or 70, boom, that's millions of dollars you could pass on to your family. That's millions of dollars you could put into a charity that you believe, a cause, whatever cause you believe in, you can put money into that. It really starts to weigh on your mind the cost of just like sitting in the high tax nation. And especially if you're like me and you were in Australia, a high hysteria and a high tax nation, it's the worst of both worlds. Like I could understand if it was like, it's high tax, but I'm getting something high quality of service, high quality of living. But in Australia, it's not a high quality of living now. They aren't living a good life, but they're paying for it. They're paying through the nose for it. So as this option, and I think Bitcoin obviously plays in here, is, the likes of, Katie with Plan B passports, people like Andrew Henderson, Nomad Capitalist, those kinds of people are going to show people, hey, guys, you can
do this.
You can just go overseas and pay less tax, right? Now, it's harder for an American, I understand that. But
Yeah,
for,
they're fucked.
yeah, basically you have to renounce, right?
Yeah.
So, or you can do the Puerto Rico thing for Americans. I think they can set up a business and get 4% tax or something low or whatever. But for most, if you're not American or Eritrea, I think there's one other nation that does that. Most other people can, if they're committed enough, take the steps, take their family, get them out overseas into a low tax or zero tax jurisdiction, and significantly save that money and put it into causes they believe in instead of letting the government. And here's the most screwed up thing. People in Australia are paying their jailers, right? We are funding the police who imprison us in our homes. That's literally what's going on.
You're paying for security.
Well, it's for your safety, Peter. It's public health,
Too much security. All right, man. Listen, love talking this shit with you. Even though I'm the opposite end. This is why I like talking to you, because you don't give me shit and you talk it through with me. You send me stuff.
Well, I try to answer it. It's like
you're not a prick about it, basically.
Yeah, it's like you can disagree with people in a, I don't know, more polite way or whatever, but sometimes you catch more flies with honey. Even if I violently disagree with statism, I have to try to engage with people. And I think it's the same story with Bitcoin, right? It's about education. There might be someone who they're coming from a fiat mindset, and you have to try to put it in a way for them that they can understand, And these are things that we do as educators, and now at Swan as well. Now,
tell me about Swan. What's going on there? Because that came out of the blue. Surprised by it, but then I thought about it. I thought that makes sense. Tell people what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So I've taken on a role managing director Swan International, and so we are essentially providing education and one-on-one guidance as well as service for people, and this is generally for people who are high net worth, business, corporate, IRA, those kinds of services. We can help onboard them and give them tips and help, right? Because someone is coming in, they're a new coiner. They might have a little bit of coin or zero, and they want a bit of learning. So I think that's part of the value with Swan, and that was part of why I joined. I mean, they were a lead sponsor of my show for a while, and so it just kind of made sense to take on the role and actually be part of the team. And
I think it's so impressive what Swan's done.
Yeah.
I think the recruitment of the team is smart as fuck. I went in the Swan tent in Miami. I was it's got all my internet friends. I think what they've done is super smart. I really like Corey. I really like the team. I'm really, really cool to see you part of it. It's a really cool company who's definitely Bitcoin only. And
exactly. Yeah. And I think that's part of it is sometimes people need education to then know why they should be getting Bitcoin. And so I think it's it's something that people can easily recommend to their friends or to their family to say, oh, look, go here, and we know they won't lead you astray, right? They'll teach you how to hold your own keys. They'll kind of encourage you to do these things. And so it just is, I think it's just a natural fit there. So I'm part of the Swan private team, and we're out here trying to help people who are looking to buy a serious amount of coin. And of course, there's, Swan, DCA, auto stacking, Bitcoin savings plan. I think that's also an important thing. I like that on the platform, there's no sell button, right? I mean, maybe eventually that'll come. But for now, it's all about regular buying, regular accumulating, which is, I think, what we should coach
I didn't
people
know there's no sell button
on the platform. Now, technically you can ask, but in terms of on the website, there's not a sell button right now.
I did not know that.
So
it's a hodl company.
Yeah, basically. And so I see this as, as you probably do as well. It's if we can help drive Bitcoin adoption, we're going to make the world a better place.
Hold on, aren't they giving that revenue there? Because if they have a sell, they make on the sell as well as the buy.
True. So there are, for private customers who ask, and I think even if you're a Swan customer and you put in a customer support ticket, but basically the numbers are crazy. It's 100 or 200 sells and 1 million buys or something crazy like that, right? It's just, but I mean, I think that's also why it's good people will send their friends and family to us, because they know they're going to get taught, regular stacking is the way, and hodl, and that can be difficult for a new person, right? Because they might think, oh yeah, I'm going to play this market, I'm going to buy here and sell there. No, you just buy and hold. The way I explain it to people is minimum holding period is 4 years. and really 10 years if you can.
Yeah.
You know? That's how I teach people.
I think I'm exactly the same.
Yeah.
4-year minimum, ideally 10. If you're young enough, maybe 20.
Yeah.
And then you're going to crush it. If my kids do it now, they'll be crushing it by the time I'm
Oh, yeah. They will have had an incredible opportunity to build wealth. And people don't understand, like, just how early we are in this, right? If we were to compare to the internet, we're probably in 1997.
Yeah.
You know, we haven't even hit kind of 1999 or 2000 yet.
Do you know what my son said? He said, Dad, I don't need to stack and hodl Bitcoin because I just get yours when you die. You prick.
Yeah, you gotta be like, hey,
like,
you
smart kid.
gotta be like, hey, you gotta work for it, you know. I need to
I'm
see
trying
that you're.
that. I was like, you're not getting my Bitcoin. He's like, yeah, I am. Well, listen, man, love talking to you. Congratulations with Swan.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're a nomad now. I think I'm going to see you more than because I didn't see you for 18 months. And appreciate everything you do. Like, even though I'm a statist and I'm a cuck and all that stuff, sending me stuff and helping me learn. You've given me so much time, and appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
Cheers. Well, I had 2 glasses. You only had 1.
Oh yeah.